Good evening, my friends. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you for being along for our second night of looking at this particular topic, how not to be a jerk during Pride Month. As I've tried to establish in our first time together, there are people on both sides of this issue that are really acting like jerks. And it's very important for us to come to some moment of dialogue, or there's not going to be any hope at all in living together in a context of mutual respect, etc. And so, in order for us to have an influence on one another, we've got to come to the table. And when both parties have a significant number of individuals who are not acting very uh, rational, shall I say, then we find it very, very difficult to have a dialogue at all. Before we get too far into this, I want to remind you of something that happened last week, and that is this idea of uh, me promoting. I think it's because I used the word jerk in relationship to the homosexual flag, and so I think that's what probably got me uh, punished by the Facebook police. Now, no further action has really come on that, and so maybe this is all going to work out. But should something like that happen, and I made my letters the wrong color, and they're blending in with my shirt. If something like that would happen, if the Facebook um, censors would somehow decide they're going to take down this particular message, you can always go to my website. You can subscribe to our e-newsletter that goes out every Friday, or you can just go to YouTube, and my YouTube channel ought to have it there. And so there you go. Let's dive into this thing. As we transition to the last 3 Thursdays in the month of June, that has been dedicated by the homosexual community to be Pride Month, I want to draw three very, very important keys to our conversation. These keys are going to be primary to the Christian, although I think the homosexual community could learn a lot about it or from it. But the problem with I'm trying to be kind here, but the problem with dealing with the homosexual community is that they tend not to care too much about what the Bible says. I mean, if they did, they obviously would be living a different lifestyle. And because they don't care what the Bible says, much of the civil, moral approach to a conversation is thrown out the window because there is no real authority in their life except themselves, their own passions, etc. And I think we can understand where that would lead us. The Ten Commandments pretty much out the window. And so when you understand that, because they have no real recognition of the authority of God in their life, you begin to recognize that most of these keys are going to come to bear in the life of the Christian, not the homosexual group. I would like to think, and in fact, I do know that there are several because I've dealt with them. As I told you last week, San Francisco, some years ago, the lesbian who fell into my arms at the invitation song and just told me she was in a broken, horrible, abusive relationship. Please help me get out of it. And we tried to do that. So I know that there are some rational, some reasonable people, individuals that are captured within this particular lifestyle and they don't want to be there. But I would say by far the majority of them are living in open rebellion towards God because God is so obvious and so plain about how he feels on this particular subject. Again, as I mentioned last week, there's not a single reference, not even a hint in all of the Bible that God has any level of approval for the homosexual lifestyle. On the other hand, the scriptures are just full of passages where he validates the heterosexual lifestyle and gives instructions on how to do it appropriately, that kind of thing. And so, understanding that, in order to live this lifestyle of homosexuality, one has to live openly in rebellion to what God has said with regards to that. Your main argument could be that the Bible is outdated, I guess, and we no longer live by those arcane standards, etc. But even in that, again, you see how that you're dismissing God as not being smart enough to make sure he could write a manual that would apply throughout all history. You're still in rebellion towards God. So what I'm about to share with you, probably in the remaining 3 evenings, is more from the standpoint of a Christian and his approach toward the homosexual community, and not to be a jerk as he approaches them and tries to convince them that there is a better way. And I think that these keys are very, very important, as you see on the screen in front of you. Number one, you got to have valid reasoning. Just because you can post a cute little meme online, or come up with a cute little phrase. God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. Just because you can do that doesn't really change the world. You know what I'm saying? And it's certainly not going to change the mind of somebody who is purely passionate about, and I say purely in the sense that that's their strong desire to be in a relationship with somebody of the same sex. Unless you got valid reasoning, you're not going to make much progress. And we are asked to make progress on this particular subject and other subjects with regards to things that are in open rebellion towards God. We're going to deal with that tonight, this idea of valid reasoning. Number two, you've got to examine your motives. Are they pure? I just this past week was debating an individual online with regards to this subject, a Christian young man that I've known for some years, but he just said that, this lifestyle is disgusting, and he went ahead various expletives to describe this lifestyle, all of which I suppose you could say is accurate from the standpoint of a Christian, but I reminded him, I said, all sin is disgusting, and we've got to be careful to approach this subject from a, do I really want to help an individual overcome a lifestyle that is self-destructing, or do I just want to throw rocks? The third one we want to deal with is practical solutions. And so we'll wrap this month up with dealing with so what can we really truly do as Christians that is practical in our offering of solutions? And it's gonna be pretty pointed. I'm gonna ask you, are you just all about self-righteousness and throwing rocks and making, big statements, or do you really want to see change in the lives of these people? And how far would you go? How much sacrifice would you make in order to bring change in the lives of these people? All right, let's deal with the first one tonight, and then in the last two Thursday nights of June, we'll deal with the other two. But tonight, valid reasoning. Valid reasoning. Got to have that. I want to ask this question by way of opening, and that is it valid reasoning, or is it just a knee-jerk reaction? You see these two folks down here, and they're supposed to depict the argumentative, if that's even a word, approach that we so often take with regards to subjects like this. You don't, when you're at Thanksgiving, you never bring up at family events politics or religion, right? Because this is the kind of response that you often would get with regards to that. Well, I think that if we could all lay our egos aside, lay our tempers aside, lay our self-righteousness aside, and just look at this subject matter from a rational standpoint of logic, that again, I'm dealing with the Christian, that God places in your brain. A logical approach, because you're not an animal, you're not a rock, you are a being created in the image of God, thus you have logic. You have the ability to reason through things. If we can approach this from valid reasoning, even those who don't trust in Scripture ought to come to at least a level of conviction that what he's saying makes sense. Paul made this argument, this kind of an argument, when he went to Mars Hill, and he found a bunch of folks who didn't believe in his God, Jehovah God, the only true God. And so he approaches this subject from a standpoint of the obvious things around it. I can see that you are very religious people because you've got this altar over here to the unknown God. Well, let me tell you about that God. You see how he did that? Further, he went on to write Romans chapter 1, in which he clearly says to us that an approach to those who are living in open rebellion towards God, an effective approach is for you and I to point to nature, point to the fact that there's got to be a God, which, by the way, is going to be the third point tonight. There has to be someone who allows your heart to beat. And so it's important for you and I to be in subjection to that person, unless we're just living for the immediate moment, instant gratification. Valid reasoning. Is it a valid approach to the subject, or are you just, as a Christian, you just kind of a knee-jerk reaction? Or from the homosexual standpoint, he's a Christian, so he's got to be a jerk. Can we have some rational? Can we all act like human beings, as we'd say here in North Arkansas? Act like human beings that can have a conversation without shouting at each other. All right, I want to offer to you 3 points with regards to this idea of is it valid reasoning. Number one, remember, you must have valid reasoning with regards to, number one, procreation. That's the first thing that I would bring to the table with regards to valid reasoning. There has never, ever, never, never, ever, ever, never, ever, ever in the history of humanity ever been a civilization that survived without employing procreation. When a group of people undermines the significance of human survival as a species, if you want to call us that, as a created group here on this planet, if you want that group to survive, procreation has to be central. And if you fight against it, undermine it, underappreciate it, you are literally fighting against the survival of your own folks. It's interesting to me that homosexuality, at least in our culture, has come to popularity about the same time as other groups that would suggest that we are destroying the planet, that it's our fault, that with regards to global warming or, whatever the Al Gore crazinesses that are out there. It's Satan using really the same logic from two different standpoints, and that is to suggest that you and I aren't important. So, because we're killing the planet, supposedly, then, really human beings are at fault, and we should, if we really want the best for the planet, we kill ourselves. Which sounds a little bit extreme, but I'm not so sure but what that's basically where some of these crazy groups are going. Now, come back to our subject matter. The same thing is true with Satan whispering in the ears of individuals that the survival of the human race is not significant. What's significant is that you enjoy your life right now. Don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about the future. You enjoy your life. It's not unlike the national debt that we keep pushing down the path until eventually some of our children or our grandchildren are going to have to pay for that national debt. It's the height of irresponsibility when you can't look beyond yourself, when you don't make preparations for others, when you are always looking to bring your self-joy, your self-pleasure, your self-satisfaction, and not considering the fact that, there's a future that's out there. There's others who are going to have to deal with the world that I have molded and made for them. Procreation would be my first point of valid reasoning. Homosexuality cannot, by its very nature, cannot bring about procreation. And so, even if you want to go with sex changes in order for this to come about, which seems it's just mind-boggling if you think about this, but individuals who would have a sex change so that in their homosexual relationship they could have or procreate children. You've got somebody in that situation who is wanting to become the opposite sex in a homosexual relationship in order to procreate children. You see how it's just nuts. It's craziness because we are denying one of the most basic, most foundational elements of the human nature, the human quality. In order to survive, there's got to be procreation. Homosexuality fights against it, or at the very least ignores it. And therefore, that's one reason that I think is very valid to bring to the table that there needs to be a change. This cannot be a good thing. Number two, it's not just procreation, but I would also suggest the influence of the genders. Let me go back to that crazy little story that I told you about with regards to somebody who wants to have a sex change. They're in a homosexual relationship, but they want to have a sex change so that they can procreate. So one of them is going to become the different sex so that they can bring children into the world. Why would you do that? Well, one of the reasons is because you, even though you won't admit it, you recognize the importance of the two separate genders. When I dealt with this lady in San Francisco, it was one of my earlier moments to start really delving into helping the homosexual community. And as I was talking with her and others, I found out something that to me it's just mind-boggling. Did you know that in a lot of homosexual relationships, they will actually designate one of the partners to be the husband and the other to be the wife? Why would they do that? Unless they recognize the power of the unique genders. The second valid reason that I would present to you why homosexuality doesn't work, it needs to be changed or repented of, is that when there is a double whammy with regards to one of the genders, there's always problems that comes from that. Now, many a good woman and many a good man has, because they lost their spouse early in life, they had to raise their children on their own, whatever it may be. Many of them have made wonderful efforts, and some of them have even succeeded in helping their children to recognize the need for both genders, even though there's only one gender in the home. I recognize that there are exceptions to this, but if you were to look, for instance, at the black community, which has a horrendous statistic with regards to children growing up without a father, especially inner city families, and you see the lives that the children tend to go on to live, you recognize just how important the father's role is within the home. You think that's important, take the mom away and give them a double whammy of daddies. I don't know if there's anybody in our lives that are more significant to our development than our mothers. And when you see a scenario where you've got two guys, two men and a baby, and they think that they can raise that baby to be a healthy baby that's going to contribute positively to our culture, you find that the road is not only very, very steep to accomplish that, but in most cases, statistically, it's impossible. Because the woman brings something to the table, the man brings something to the table. I love this picture right here. It's right there. I love this picture. I wish I had made it bigger for you, but it's got this family as they're pedaling down the road, and you can see the mom. See where the mom's at? The mom's all nurture. The mom's got her hands all over the steering wheel. You can do this, sweetheart, all those kind of things. Notice where dad's at. Now, that doesn't mean the dad's removed from the picture. Dad is security. Dad's at the back watching for when does he need to step in. When is there a moment where dad has to, you got to look at the context, and maybe there's something he's got to protect his daughter and his wife from, etc. You see where dad's at? I love this picture because it illustrates, I think, very much the way that you got to have both roles happening. The second valid reason that homosexuality has to be repented of, we've got to help individuals caught up in this lifestyle, is because a double dose of one gender doesn't work. God created us so that we would have the influences of both a mom and a dad, because both of them bring something to the table. And when we don't have that influence, we see that things don't turn out well. Let me give one very personal illustration outside of the homosexual discussion with regards to the church today and the number of young women who have been inspired to start their own career rather than be full-time mothers at home, as Titus chapter 2, verse 5 would suggest they need to do. You're seeing the collapse of the godly family, even within the church, within the church. They're saying that something like 70+% of our young people, upon graduation from high school, they leave the church, most of whom never come back. We are just having an implosion within the church because we have denied the proper roles within the family. We have allowed feminism to come into the church, and many preachers, most of the elders that I know, don't have a backbone, not willing to challenge it, not willing to preach Titus chapter 2, 3 through 5 as a command, because if they do that, they're going to make somebody uncomfortable. It's going to be awkward, and we're going to have to actually do our job as an elder. You can see what's happening to the Lord's church because we have denied the roles within the home. If it's happening within the Lord's church, I guarantee you it's double, triple that in the world, because the church sets the bar for morality within the world. When there is no father present, there will be problems. When there is no mother present, there will be problems. When instead you have two dads and no moms, you are definitely heading for problems. When instead you got two moms, you're definitely heading for problems. Genders, the importance of genders would be the second logical, nonsensical thing that I would point to with regards to valid reasoning. And then number 3, and again, I recognize in this third one that I'm having to actually step into the realm of the Bible, but I think I can do this from a logical standpoint as well. And that is, it seems to me that it's brainless and selfish to deny that something, someone, some power out there is allowing me to survive, allowing me to exist. the the insanity of us coming to this point in our existence via evolution is just that. It's insane. It really is. There is a power, an authority that allows you to draw breath, allows your lungs to fill, allows your heart to beat, gives permission to the sun to come up in the morning so that you can have sunshine. There is a power out there. And it seems to me that it is the ultimate of ignorance for us not to seek that power, to try to discover that power. And in the process, doing whatever we can to honor that power, because if that power can bring me to be, it seems that he can, as we often say to Mom, she can bring you in the world, she can take you out of the world. Well, if there is a power, if there is a God that is out there, and that God has the power to withdraw oxygen from your lungs, to keep your heart from beating, if he has that amount of influence in your life, doesn't it make logical sense that you would want to know what he would want to bring about a blessing from him? To appease him if you want to look at God in that way. It's not a healthy way, but it's better than not thinking about him at all. What would God want from you? Now, as I said in my opening, and I'll say it again, you'll probably hear it in the next two lessons as well, not a single hint in all of Scripture that God has ever, not once, ever validated homosexuality. Never. There's nothing in the Bible that gives any. Why doesn't he provide some kind of information with regards to how to conduct a healthy homosexual relationship? He does for heterosexuals. Why is there nothing there? Zip, zero, total silence. You think it might be because he doesn't approve, especially given the fact that he gives us Romans chapter 1 in the New Testament, and he gives us the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Old Testament and other places, tells us that he doesn't approve. Logic would say that you should do what you can to honor the one who allows you to breathe. When life is reduced to just instant gratification, I guarantee you, we're on the verge of total chaos. And that's where we are in our country today, where we are in our culture today. Look at us. We don't value human life. We are obese because we don't seem to even have the self-control to eat what is right and what is best for us. We are strung out on drugs because we don't know how to deal with everyday occurrences. We are seeking instant gratification with regards to homosexuality because we've done everything else and this seems like to be the next big thrill. When life is reduced to just instant gratification, I guarantee you, my friends, we're on the verge of chaos, and that's where we are today. And that is the third of three reasons as to why I think it's important for you and I to have valid reasoning for our rejection of homosexuality. Now, again, what I've said this evening, I know is horribly offensive to those who are dedicated to the homosexual lifestyle. Well, what I've said this evening, if you have any level of sincerity with regards to this subject, really wanting to grow and to be a better person, not just stagnate in your present condition, if you have any level of that, you have to agree that there is some sense being made here. Homosexuality does not produce procreation. Homosexuality does not produce a blended harmony of the genders. Homosexuality does not produce a blessing from the one who allows you to breathe. And because of that, I think it is valid reasoning, and therefore I bring it to you if you are a homosexual and struggling with homosexuality. I bring it to you and I say, consider these things, please. Next time, I want to ask this question. Is it from pure motives or is it from self-righteousness? I'm going to beat up the church a little bit next time because I think that it's time for the church to recognize that we've got a problem. And our problem is a heart problem. We have collected to ourselves all kinds of stuff and materialism, built large structures that sit empty for the majority of the week, thinking to ourselves that we have made a name for ourselves, but at the same time justifying it because it's all for God. Is it? Is it really? Is it pure motives that we're operating on with regards to homosexuality and our objection to it? Or is it just a self righteousness? I didn't grow up with that, don't like it, seems odd, or as my friend would say, it seems disgusting, and therefore I just conclude it can't be right because I don't like it. Is it something that really pricks your heart? Are you really concerned? Do you grieve over those who are caught up in a self destructive lifestyle? Or are you just out to beat up people? That is what we'll talk about next time. I love you. Thanks for being here. Sonny Chow saying be there. Matthew 16:26.